So good morning everyone, and what a fantastic morning it is. Just look at these conditions all around me. I've recently been very busy. I've had a lot of admin work to do, a lot of editing work, so many hours in front of the computer, and I'm not complaining, but I've really been looking forward to getting out today. And when I saw it was going to be these misty conditions, you couldn't hold me back. I was just so keen to get out, so I'm delighted to be here. Now, on a day such as this, it would be very easy just to head to the woodland. You're not guaranteed good images in a woodland, but these conditions are just ideal for woodland photography. I've decided to challenge myself a little bit more by coming to the coast. Of course, I can get really nice images here, hopefully, in these conditions, but as you may see behind me, once you get far enough and look out to sea, you're just looking out into nothing, just lots of grey space. So that can make compositions a little bit more challenging. You may find a really nice foreground, but the lack of a sky and clouds and perhaps some mountains in the distance just means the image doesn't work. But on the flip side, the positive side, it can create lots of negative space. So if you're going for a minimalist image, that may work. Or if I find some rocks going off into the distance, just fading into the mist that we've got today, that could work really well too. So there's lots of possibilities, but you need to find the right thing, and that needs to be in the area that I'm in today. But anyway, I'm really excited. I'm going to get quite wet today, I think, because there's this persistent drizzle that's going with the mist, but I'm not bothered about that. So it's time to explore and try and get a composition. So as you watch the video, it's probably only been a few seconds ago that I last spoke to the camera, but for me, here as I record today, it's probably been about an hour and a quarter ago now. And the reason for that is I've been making my way along very slowly, very carefully, because it really is treacherous today, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But I've finally found something that I want to photograph. It's been very important for me today, just because the conditions are nice, not to just take shots. I really wanted to find something that I'm drawn to and I'm excited about and that I want to photograph, and I found that here. And often when I'm out doing landscape photography, I'll see a scene or a subject and I'll have a look around briefly, and I'll know there's one composition that I'm going to prefer as the photographer. Others may disagree, of course, but I think here it's worth me taking potentially at least two compositions. Looking at this scene behind me, I've got one image in my mind that I think I'm going to prefer, but I still think it's worth me taking another one because it could make for quite a nice shot as well. So what I'm going to do before I move further forward, I'm going to take a shot from somewhere in this area because I'm drawn to these dark, wet rocks just in front of me here, which point out to those rocks at sea in the distance. And then beyond that, there's some lighter rocks, and I think the diagonal almost with these rocks here, the dark ones, are where they point off to in the distance, is very nice. And then we've got the rocks on the left, which I think balance nicely with the rocks on the right. So there's various layers and some diagonals going on as I look at the scene here, and I think it all just fits together quite nicely and forms a nice image with nice balance. So I'm going to explore that possibility. I'm also going to try and get a bit further forward, not take in foreground, not take in the rocks at the side, and just get a far simpler, more clean image of those rocks and the atmospheric mist that's behind them. And I think that's going to work really well. I also quite like how the water's hitting those rocks out at sea from the left hand side. So that's my thoughts at the moment before I get the camera out of my bag. So just a few words quickly about safety in landscape photography, which I think is really important. If you've been doing this a long time, you'll know these things, but often it's good to get a nice little reminder. But if you're watching this and you're new to landscape photography, this information really is important. But if you're heading out alone, especially if you're alone, try and let some people know where you're going and the time roughly that you think you'll be back, just in case anything happens to you. Always try and take a phone, and if there's a signal, that may help you call for help if you need it. But just be really careful. No photograph is worth risking your own safety for. It can be very, very dangerous, and especially at the coast. Nothing's happened to me today. I've not slipped, I've not had any near misses, but I've been going very, very carefully because it is so treacherous. On a wet day such as today, everywhere is wet. And if the tide has been in and receded, of course, the rocks and so on can be so slimy. There can be seaweed, just wet seawater, and you really can end up on your back in just a split second, and the consequences don't bear thinking about, really. It's a horrible thought. So just be really, really careful. And the other thing to be careful of at the coast is to try and be aware of the tide and the tide times. Is the tide coming in or going out? Now, I know at the moment the tide is slowly coming in, so that means I can sort of plan in terms of photography, but also for my own safety. So I don't want to walk further along a coastline and find the tide comes in and then I'm suddenly trapped. I can't get back. So just a few things that's really important and to remember. But speaking about the tide, as I say, I know it's coming in, so it's important I get this first shot quickly, then try and carefully get a little bit further forward and grab that second image before the tide maybe comes too far in and I can't get the clear vantage point that I want. So this really is a day in which I need to be extremely patient. Accompanying this wonderful mist is, of course, this persistent drizzle, and it's getting very heavy at times, so everything is getting really wet. But the main problem is that it's persistently getting the front of my lens wet, or indeed the polarizer that I've got on at the moment. And also because I'm recording the experience to make a video, the camera that I'm recording on is consistently getting wet as well, so I apologise for any of that shows up in the video. But just everything that goes along with that demands patience. But it's not a problem, and hopefully I'll get some nice images to reward me. So just to talk about what I'm doing here, I've got my camera set up as it needs to be. The composition is set, the exposure is correct. I have got the camera focused, and I've got the whole thing covered up with this cloth. And I think I mentioned there I've got the polarizer on the front. So I'm only able to get one shot at a time, and then I need to continually wipe the polarizer. So I make sure it's clean, wipe it, cover it up, come round the back of the camera again, quickly lift the front of the cloth, take my shot and put the cloth back down. And I'm not taking a lot of shots here, but conditions are changing slightly every few minutes. I'm taking a small number of shots, and I need to repeat that process for every one I take. So a little bit of hassle, but hopefully it'll be a decent reward. So as I said, I've got the polarizer on, and I just have it turned ever so slightly, and it's just to take a little bit of the glare off some of these rocks in front of me. Now, and of course on the sea itself, and I won't leave the camera pointed in that direction too long because that's where most of the drizzle is coming from. But when I look here, everything looks fine to my eye, but looking through the camera, I'm just seeing a little bit of brightness in certain areas which I think is detracting from the image overall. So just turning the polarizer a little bit is helping get rid of that, and I think it's just making the overall image look a bit more pleasing. It's also emphasizing a little bit of the darkness in some of these rocks just in front of me. But I'm not going to point in this direction too long, but I've got these rocks at the bottom right, and I really like the seaweed which is growing on them. We've got some contrasting lighter rocks just beyond that, taking in some of these darker rocks at the left, which sort of balance the rocks off to the right there, further out at sea. And then I've got the rocks out in the mist, further out at sea, in pretty much the top left area of my image. So overall, I think it's working quite well. I'm hesitant to say at the moment. I need to see it on the large screen. I think it's definitely an image worth taking. How much I'll like it, I don't know until I edit it. But I'm thinking at the moment I may prefer just the more simple shot that I talked about, but I'm not going to commit to anything. As we know as photographers, you've got to see the image in the larger screen sometimes just to be 100% sure, but definitely worth taking. So I'll show you that image, and then I'm going to carefully move forward and try and get another one of these rocks out in the mist. So I've moved around and been able to frame up the more simple composition that I talked about earlier, and I'm really glad I did so because I think it looks quite good. I also spoke earlier about the tide coming in, and as you may see now, I've just caught this shot in a nick of time. So I'll show you what I've captured, and then I'm going to quickly retreat and get out of here before I get very wet feet. So I've moved on a little bit, but I've still been capturing images featuring these rocks out at sea behind me here. The mist has now completely gone, so a lot of the atmosphere has gone, so I think the best of the conditions have passed. The drizzle has stopped, so it's easier to take photographs now, but I think the best of the conditions have passed. So I've captured my final two images from this area here. So when I found these rocks earlier in the morning, I really thought they would look nice in a number of photographs. And what I mean by that is I thought if I could just move around in a small area around these rocks, there would be potential to take a number of different compositions. And I think this is a fantastic exercise for everyone to do from time to time to try and develop your skills in the area of composition. So I guess you could call this sort of working the scene, or working a location, or working a very small area. And because you're spending a lot of time in a small area, you give yourself time to soak it all in. The longer you spend here, the more you begin to see. And you pay attention to small changes in movement and how it affects compositions. You notice the small details in the landscape itself, and you just give yourself time to digest everything and really work hard on your compositions. It really gets the mind tuned in to looking for compositions. Even if you don't get any portfolio level images, it's still a fantastic thing to do and a great way to spend your time. So for my final two images today, the first one features these rocks coming in from the bottom left, and then over to my right, which you can't see in the video at the moment, we've got some really impressive rock structures with some nice jagged lines coming in from the right. So we've got this sweeping in from the left, those rocks from the right, and then we've got the sea and that final resting point for your eyes, the rocks out in the distance. And then for my last image, I've been taking these rocks here in at the left and base of my image, almost as a bit of framing, you could say, and then the sea and the rocks up at the top right as well. And I think that's worked fairly well, but I've just decided today, due to the conditions and due to finding these rocks, that it would really be best use of my time today to work a small area and just work on composition a little bit. I've not really wanted to do any long exposures today because the conditions in terms of the drizzle has been so hard to work in that there's no way I could have kept the polarizer or an ND filter or the front of my lens dry today in these conditions long enough for a long exposure. It just wouldn't have been possible, especially pointing the camera out towards these rocks because the drizzle has been coming in from there. And as I said earlier, I only had time to take really fast shots and then quickly cover up the front of the lens again. I think it's been very worthwhile coming out today, and I've certainly enjoyed my time, and I hope you've enjoyed watching and potentially found something useful from the video. So I'll show you those two images to finish, and I'd just like to thank you again for watching. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully I'll see you in my next one. Birds, that's fantastic. I would have liked to have had my camera set up for those.